Perfect. All right, let's jump in. Before jumping into the talk here, a little bit about my background and why I'm here, why I'm giving this talk. So I started my career at Dropbox back in 2010 when it was 25 people. Helped it grow to over 1,500 over the next 5 years. I was on the engineering side. Even within a year out of school, I was running and leading engineering teams there. And hiring was our top priority during hypergrowth. I joined right at the inflection point when Dropbox started to grow really quickly. And I took that to heart and really leaned in. I spent more than 50% of my time on hiring any given year and got experience with everything, including a lot of the standard stuff that maybe some of you have from larger companies, things like interviewing, campus recruiting, giving talks. But I actually also rolled up my sleeves and was a full cycle recruiter to hire our first few data scientists when I was told that the recruiting team didn't have enough bandwidth. I essentially stepped into that role and was my own recruiter. I even did M&A. I sourced and acquired two different companies for talent, but also partnered with our recruiting team to help close hundreds of really strong candidates. We had this notion of an engineering closer, which was somebody that partnered directly with the full cycle recruiter to help close. And then I even got to revamp our referrals program, teamed up with our head of rec ops and did that when we started to see a plateau in the number of referrals that were coming in. I then took a lot of that experience at Dropbox and started Gem. At Gem, we're building the only AI-first all-in-one recruiting platform. We help thousands of companies like Google, Stripe, Anthropic, Brex hire really great talent. But I think most importantly, from the lens of this talk, oh, hey, is that somebody from Brex? What's up? I think most importantly, from the lens of this talk, I've been in your shoes really recently. I scaled Gem from 0 to 10 to 30 to 75 to over 200 people in the first 4 or 5 years of starting Gem. We now have thousands of customers. We've raised 170 million from top investors like YC, Excel, Greylock, Iconic. And ever since raising money, recruiting our team has always been one of my top 3 priorities here at Gem, usually my number 1 priority. For fun, I do a ton of writing about recruiting. A lot of my stuff is about hiring at scale. So you can follow me on LinkedIn or just add me directly. Just mention that you were at this talk so that I know if you want to see more from me in terms of content. But I'm also the author of startuphiring101.com, which has more than 20 really in-depth guides into every single aspect of startup recruiting. I basically open sourced how we hired our founding team at Gem. This includes step-by-step instructions, a bunch of example templates, best practices that you can copy and bring to your startup. And this is actually the foundation for this talk today. So just to give you a sense of what this looks like, it's a Notion site, again, with about 20 really detailed guides all the way from where to find and how to reach out to great people, to how to have that initial sell conversation, to how to nurture passive talent over time, a bunch of different guides on how to interview, and then a really detailed guide on how to sell and close. All right, back to the talk. I wouldn't be doing my job and hustling as a founder if I didn't give a very quick plug for Gem and also our startup program, which could be really valuable for a lot of you if you're sub 100 employees. The rest of this talk is going to be Gem agnostic, I promise. At Gem, we're building the only AI-first all-in-one recruiting platform. It's very similar to Apollo, if you've used that for sales, but for recruiting. Outreach and CRM, it's going to help you source first and second degree connections on LinkedIn, have a place to put them, reach out, automate your follow-ups. It's a little bit of an upgrade from a Google Sheet or an Airtable because we make it one click to upload from LinkedIn. We keep those profiles fresh through data enrichment, and then we let you set reminders for yourself and sync any one-off emails that were sent and automate your follow-ups so that you and your co-founders can see which touch points each other's had in one system. We've got AI-powered search, which lets you search our database of 650 million plus public profiles using generative AI. to automate a lot of your sourcing. And so this comes in handy once you've exhausted your first few connections, your network. It means you don't have to buy an expensive LinkedIn recruiter license. We have a modern applicant tracking system. Once you're ready to post jobs, track candidates through the interview stages, compile interview feedback, make offers. And as soon as you start to get any meaningful amount of inbound, we're going to help you rank it with AI. There's some stuff for scheduling. There's some stuff for analytics, fully configurable when you're ready to scale. And we have a full suite of other products as well that help growth stage and enterprise companies. Once you reach hundreds, then thousands, and then tens of thousands of employees. But this is the relevant stuff for founders and early stage recruiters that are building out their founding team. And it's actually going to be everything you need to scale to 100 or even a few hundred employees. We pair this best-in-class startup bundle with an industry-leading startup program, which we just relaunched about 2 months ago. So to give everybody a sense of the startup program, out of thousands of deals and products on YC's internal forum and database, the Gem startup program is consistently ranked in the top 20 by YC founders, just above Rippling, Stripe, and Deal. To put that in perspective. So it's the highest rated, most used recruiting product by founders. I can really confidently say that we offer the highest value, lowest cost recruiting product for startups that are of up to 100 employees. It's completely self-serve. If you're less than 30 employees, you don't even have to talk to sales. Plus, we offer a 6-month free period and then 50% off year one. So at this point, thousands of founders have gone through our startup program. With this program, similar to the AWS startup program, if you're familiar with that, we're heavily subsidizing our startup segment. We're basically giving Gem away for free for the opportunity to scale with you as you grow. All right, enough about Gem. Let's jump in. The talk today is going to be broken into 5 sections. We're going to spend 5 minutes on introducing recruiting, talking about the parallels between recruiting and sales. Then we're going to spend 5 minutes talking about which top of funnel sources to focus on as startups, which ones to avoid and why. We're going to spend about 20 minutes doing deep dives into 4 of the most effective sources for startups: in-network hiring, referrals, cold sourcing, and then also nurturing passive talent, because a lot of the people you want to hire might not be ready yet. And then we'll spend about 5 minutes on interviewing and debrief best practices. We'll carve out 10 minutes for selling and closing, and then we're going to carve out a good 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. So be dropping your questions in the Q&A tab here, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. I might even answer some quick ones as we go. Quick poll of hands, though, just to help me ground myself in everybody's experience with recruiting. What is your level of startup recruiting experience? So first, are you a first-time founder with no recruiting experience at all? Second would be, are you a first-time founder with some experience, but recruiting for your startup for the first time? Third would be second-time founder. And then fourth would be, you're a recruiter that's helping startups hire. Otherwise, just let me know in the chat if you don't identify with any of these options. I give everybody a sec to fill out that poll. Cool. I see some folks chiming in the chat. Looks like we have a few advisors, recruiters that are helping startups. Great. Let's give everybody 5-10 more seconds, and then we'll close out the poll. Oh, cool. Caitlin, can you share what you identify with there? Free, sweet. Cool. So we've got a lot of recruiters helping startups hire. We have a lot of founders. Oh, cool. Yeah, that's great. We have some staffing, like recruiting firms that are using Gem with their clients as their ATS. That's great. Cool. So, this talk is really geared around startup hiring. It's actually designed for first-time founders that haven't recruited before. So For some of you with a lot of experience, this might feel a little bit basic in a few sections. We're really going to get back to basics here. With that said, I'm pretty sure everybody, whether you're a first-time founder or a second-time founder or a recruiter that's helping early-stage startups, is going to walk away with a few like really practical nuggets or gems, as we like to say, that you can really use to up-level your hiring game. And even if your company's a bit bigger, you're going to be able to come away with a few takeaways here. So for first-time founders and for folks that are getting into the recruiting game, if you can walk away with just one thing from this talk, it's this. Recruiting is important and recruiting is hard. Seriously, the single biggest mistake that I see amongst first-time founders when it comes to recruiting is just not prioritizing it enough. And if you're a recruiting partner working with these founders, this is a really good thing to emphasize. Also, if you're a recruiter that's just starting to work with startups for the first time, I think this is a really important takeaway. Once startups raise money, hiring needs to be the single number one top priority. Recruiting people to your startup, it's the highest leverage thing you can do, so long as you have the runway for it. It's way higher leverage than writing that next line of code or closing that next enterprise deal. And on the flip side, hiring the wrong people can be catastrophic. It can set you back months or even quarters, which is a lifetime in a startup. And recruiting is also really, really hard. As first-time founders, a lot of us have no clue where to start. And even if you have years of experience recruiting at top companies, startup hiring is completely different. So it's really, really hard, especially since most people don't want to work for you. Any Silicon Valley fans here? Folks know Dinesh? Yeah, that's like basically your talent pool. And you're going to have tons of competition from companies big and small. We have won and lost candidates to every single company on this slide in the early days of Gem. And that's because the top people that you want to hire for your startup, they can get jobs anywhere. And these competitors are going to be more established. They're going to pay more. They're going to have a better talent brand, and they're going to be less risky. And so that's what we're up against when we're doing startup hiring. And that's why everything that we're talking about today is so important. Well, a lot of us might be hiring for startups for the first time. Many of us as founders have probably done sales, or at least we've fundraised recently, which is very similar to sales. Recruiting is super similar to sales. There's obviously some differences, but I think of thinking about it this way for folks who have done sales but maybe haven't done recruiting is very clarifying. I'm going to refer back to this analogy throughout the talk. Just like in sales, recruiting is a funnel. It's going to take a lot of work at the top of the funnel just to close one hire, especially for startup hiring, just like it does to close one deal. You're going to want to set goals for yourself, hold yourself accountable to building a pipeline of really strong candidates. Qualification is really key, just like in sales, arguably more so in recruiting, because you need to understand whether they're a good fit for your startup. Whereas in sales, usually you're trying to close any deal you can. But just like in sales, you need to qualify them out if you're not a good fit for them, so that you can spend time on people who are going to actually close and join your startup. Whether that's because you can't pay big company comp, or their commute is too long, or they want the stability of a larger company, or dozens of other reasons. Just like in sales, you're going to spend a lot of time selling. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this, but the one thing that I want to emphasize a few times throughout this talk is selling doesn't start with the offer. It starts with your very first conversation, and it continues throughout the rest of the interview process. And selling doesn't just mean pitching. Just like in sales, you need to get really good at asking discovery questions so that you can frame up your opportunity in a way that uniquely resonates with each candidate. Just like in sales, you're going to experience a lot of no's. You can't be timid in recruiting. If you don't put yourself out there, if you don't sell your vision, you're not going to hire a team. It's as simple as that. And then recruiting your founding team is going to be very similar to founder-led sales. It's going to mean engaging your network. It's going to be really high touch. You're going to do a lot of things that don't scale. And it's going to be a lot more work than you'd expect. You're going to need to really hustle. To underscore everything that we just talked about, here's an example funnel with pass-through rates for startup hiring, just like a sales funnel. Conversion rates, they're going to vary a lot depending on your startup, the type of talent you're going after, where you're finding candidates, which geos you're recruiting into. But the high level takeaway is the same. You're likely going to engage with 50 people at the top of the funnel just to make one hire. So all of that is to say hiring is hard. You need to prioritize it, and don't get discouraged or make the wrong hiring decisions, worse yet, just because your first few conversations don't pay off. So where do you start? Do we have any gamers here? Any folks into video games? Come on, we got to have some gamers here. Nobody in the chat? All right, maybe I'm the only gamer, but in any case, growing up, I would always look up these tier lists for my favorite video games. And it's just a fun way to rank and visualize the viability of characters, items, strategies. Sweet, I see we've got at least a few gamers here in the chat. So here's my ranking for where to find candidates, sources of candidates for founders doing startup hiring. And I think this applies to recruiters as well for companies of up to 30, 50, maybe even 100 employees. So S tier, that is the best tier. Every person should be spending a lot of time here. So sourcing and recruiting from your network, it's going to be the highest ROI way to hire your early team, especially engineers. We're going to do a deep dive of in-network hiring in just a sec. A tier, this is solid. And the idea here is to spend time on these two areas as soon as you're getting diminishing returns from your in-network hiring. So startup hiring is very much a team sport. If you've hired a few founding team members, leveraging the referrals can be a really great way to expand your company's network. You can also get referrals from friends, VCs, advisors, even before you have employees. So we're going to do a deep dive on referrals in a sec. Sourcing second degree connections. Once you've exhausted your network, once you're hitting diminishing returns on referrals, you're going to want to start implementing cold sourcing. And I'll do a deeper dive into this strategy as well with some example reach out templates, a really killer tactic that we discovered at Gem, which can turn second degree connections into these quasi first degree connections by leveraging social proof. I think it's also really scalable. So this trick is called the connector node trick. We'll do a deep dive on it. And then tier B is situational. So the idea is to use these in certain situations. Really check out the guides on Startup Hiring 101 for when and where to use agencies, marketplaces, campus recruiting, and what the gotchas are. The one thing I'll say about recruiting firms and external recruiters, because we have a number of folks here on the call, is you should definitely consider working with them if you're hiring for a role where you have less experience, less of a network. And I think the key is to work with a recruiting firm that really specializes in that role and also specializes in startup hiring. One of the litmus tests I like is, can that external recruiter actually teach you something about that role? And then I also really encourage you to reference them, see what your peers say in terms of other folks that have worked with them. Campus recruiting, this one's very situational, only if you have a strong network there, which actually makes it a lot closer to in-network hiring. C tier, these are almost always a waste of time for smaller startups. Again, companies less than 100 employees. Unfortunately, most other strategies, inbound, meetups, talent marketing, even campus recruiting for the most part, these are strategies that are going to work for larger companies, but they're going to be lower ROI for a startup. And that's because they either require a strong talent brand, which startups don't have yet, or they take too long to get going. For example, in the case of unlocking new campuses for campus recruiting and yield the ROI, and you don't have that time as a small startup. So let's jump into the first deep dive. This is all about in-network hiring, sourcing first-degree connections. So sourcing and recruiting from your network, it's going to be the highest ROI way to hire your early stage team, especially engineers. So I think every founder should start here. Every co-founder should be spending time on this, regardless of their role, whether they're the CEO or the CTO or the COO. Everybody should be spending some time hiring and trying to pull in engineers from their network. In-network hires are really great because it's easier to get an idea of whether they're a good fit. Either you've worked with them directly or you can back channel them really easily because you're connected to folks, know them in your network. But most importantly, people from your network are going to be much more likely to take a leap of faith and join you. Joining an early stage startup is really risky. And it's a lot easier to recruit somebody if they know you and if you're a known quantity to them. So if you and your co-founders or your team are uneasy with reaching out to your network about joining at your startup, I really urge everyone to get comfortable with it. Here are the basics. You start by building your lists, your short list of 10 to 25 people, and then you cast a wider net. At Gem, we called these our L1 connections and our L2 connections. In terms of L1 connections, these are your gems, so to speak. At Dropbox, we actually called this short list our gems. And so now you see where the name for Gem came from. It's the short list of 10 to 25 people that you've worked with closely or you know by reputation that you'd want to work with no matter what in a heartbeat. And this is where you and your co-founders should start. L2 connections. These are the folks that you suspect might be good, but maybe haven't worked as closely with. These can be classmates from school, friends from previous internships, colleagues from former companies. And if, folks dialing in here, if you're more of a recruiter that's partnering up with startups, I think this is also like really helpful framing that you can take back to those startup founders so that they can be involved in helping pull people into the pipeline from their network. The idea here is to carve out a few hours every week to go through your LinkedIn connections or even Facebook and Instagram to build out your lists of L1 and L2 connections. If you're using Gem, you can create two different projects for L1s and L2s for each founder. Have each founder download the Gem Chrome extension, and then you can import those folks into those projects from LinkedIn with one click. I'd recommend you go through literally everyone you're connected with on social to see if they're people you'd want to explore working with. If you're just thinking about it from scratch, you're probably going to miss out on some really great people. If you haven't done a great job maintaining social media connections, that was me, honestly, when I started Gem. Run a search on LinkedIn to find people that you know that you haven't connected with. Connect with them and then add them to your tracker. You could try running a LinkedIn search for secondary connections for people from your school, for any companies that you've worked for, or any companies that you've interned at to see what folks LinkedIn puts in front of you, and start sourcing them into your projects. As you start to build your lists, it's time to reach out. Your primary goal when reaching out is just to get to that initial conversation, whether that's a call, a Zoom catch up, a coffee, a lunch, et cetera. So for candidates that are in your network, I'd recommend reaching out as you build your list. And that's because then you'll be able to personalize your message while you're on their profile. If you're using Gem, you can personalize and send emails right alongside LinkedIn without having to jump between tabs. But for folks that you know really well, just shoot them a text or WhatsApp or Messenger message or whatever. I think the key is just to mark this in your spreadsheet or one-click log that outreach in Gem so that your co-founders and the rest of your team know not to double ping these people. I don't recommend sending in-mails. A lot of talent, especially tech talent, have their notifications off. If you don't have their contact info, Gem can help you find that for about 70, 80% of people. Another pro tip, if you're first degree connected with someone, most of those connections will allow you to see their contact info on LinkedIn too. Just like in sales, it's really important to always be building pipeline. So hold yourself accountable to contacting and following up with at least 25 people per week. This is super important. It should only take 1 to 2 hours a week, even less if you're using Gem to automate some of that work. For L1 connections that you know really well, you may want to catch up casually before jumping straight into a recruiting conversation. It could be as simple as shooting them a text, asking if they want to catch up over coffee or something. If you want to be a little bit direct but not overly pushy, you could frame it up as getting their feedback on what you're working on and catching up on what they've been doing as well. So here's a template that we used at Gem in the early days to hire our first 10 people. And these are all people from our network. Or you could just be super direct. Here's another template. an actual cold email template that we used to hire our first L2 connection at Gem, Jet Zhang, who was a friend of ours from MIT. I knew him socially, but had never worked with him before personally. And so we had reached out over email with a template like this. In terms of replies, if they're interested, let's go. Let's get that on the calendar ASAP. In terms of not interested, you're going to get a lot of rejections, which is okay. It's a numbers game, so keep at it. Say thank you. If you know the person, one cool trick is to ask them for their referrals. So like the top 3 people that they'd recommend you reach out to. Sometimes you get some great referrals. And then chances are the timing might not be right. So plant the seeds that you're going to follow up down the road. Set a due date for yourself, either in Gem or your tracker. And then regardless of how you reached out, it's really important to follow up 2 to 3 times if you don't get a response. And if you're using Gem, we can automate all these email follow-ups for you. Our Chrome extension, it also works alongside Gmail, so you can really easily respond with a template there or set a reminder on the person directly from your email inbox, and we'll ping you when it's time to follow up. Okay, so that was sourcing first-degree connections. I can't stress this enough. So much of hiring the founding team, your first 10 people, but even like your next 20 up to 30 people is going to be in network hiring. It's going to be a lot of hustling. There really isn't a silver bullet. It's a little bit of a grind. Next up is referrals. Referrals is all about scaling out a lot of the things that you've done to engage your own first-degree connections across your team. So once you have a few founding employees, leveraging the referrals is a really great way to expand your company's network. But even before you have employees, you can get referrals from VCs, advisors, and even friends. There are just 2 keys to leveraging your team for referrals. And I think this is helpful framing also for our recruiting partners dialing in who are working with startup founders and their founding teams. The first is getting the whole team really comfortable referring friends. Some people, especially engineers, are shy about referrals, or they have this aversion to reaching out to their friends. So first, you have to get over that hurdle with people. The three things that I always like to reinforce are: 1, explaining the importance of recruiting, that it's the single highest leverage thing that anyone on the team can spend time on. 2, remind them that teaming up with you could be a really great opportunity for their friends. After all, if this employee is working on the startup with you, why wouldn't their referrals be interested too? And then assure them that it's okay if somebody's not sure whether their referral is looking or not. It can never really hurt to reach out and ask. From there, have your team build out their lists of L1 and L2 connections just like you did. And then here's the second and maybe the most important key to referrals, arguably the most important part of all. You need to put in place pretty good process and playbooks to make it as easy as possible and as low pressure as possible to reach out and to follow up with referrals. Seriously, I can't tell you how many times I've seen teams run really great referral jam sessions. They generate a great list of people, only to see a majority of those folks never get contacted. There's 2 most common problems. The first is just not knowing where to start. For someone who's never sent a recruiting reach out, it's really hard to know where to start with messaging. So having a few reach out templates can be really key so that your entire team isn't left reinventing the wheel on how to reach out. So I'll share ours in a second that we used. The second is, even if you do your best to get your team over the hurdle in terms of having anxiety about recruiting their friends, some employees might still be nervous about reaching out to their friends, their former coworkers, and for certain folks on the team, you may want to offer to just send the outreach yourself. In terms of those reach out templates, here are 3 that we used. Feel free to just copy them and make them your own. So for employees that are super comfortable sending reach outs to their friends, go with a really direct approach from that employee. Here's an actual template that we armed our team with at Gem. Extra bonus points if they're down to take that first coffee chat and help recruit their referral to get you a little bit of leverage. I think it can be really impactful to hear directly from them in that first conversation. For folks who are a little bit less comfortable recruiting their friends, an indirect approach can go a really long way. One option is to have some sort of recurring social gathering for your startup, like a monthly happy hour or game night, just always on the calendar. It gives you and your team an excuse to reach out to your smart friends and invite them to something without directly recruiting them. So as a founder or as a recruiter helping out startups, you can get to know your team's referrals in a more casual setting and then start following up yourself once you've established that connection. If your employees really aren't comfortable reaching out directly, one option is to collaborate with them on a template that a founder can send on their behalf, ideally one that mentions them. So here's an example. These were just a few example templates. Feel free to check out the referral guide on startuphiring101.com for the really complete guide and a lot more example templates, including text messages you can send, tips on how to track referrals and follow up with them over longer periods of time. Okay, once you've tapped out first-degree connections, once you've tapped out referrals, you're most likely going to need to supplement with cold sourcing. The pros with cold sourcing is you can literally reach out to anyone out there, so it's pretty scalable. It's also easier to prioritize diversity of all kinds because your first-degree connections, by definition, are less diverse. They tend to be people that look more like you. The con is, as a startup, you're going to get a much lower response rate for cold sourcing because you don't yet have a talent brand. And the people that you're sourcing don't really know who you are. And so this is why I always recommend tapping out in-network and referrals first. With that said, we learned this really cool trick in the early days of Gem, which I call the connector node. And this is something that you can do as a founder. This is something you can do as a recruiter, collaborating with your founders. The crux of the connector node strategy is to find people from your network who are super well connected to top talent. So this can be really top classmates from school. It could be your advisors, your angel investors. It could be top peers and managers from previous companies. Then source into their connections on LinkedIn and name drop them when reaching out. I'm going to share the exact template that we use to give you a better sense of how this works. But the key is make sure that they have a strong reputation. You want the people you're sourcing, reaching out to think, oh, wow, Steve knows Albert Nee from MIT and Dropbox. Albert's great. And what it does is it establishes validation and credibility for you by association amongst the people that might not know you personally because you know this other top tier talent, this guy, Albert. And then the second thing is make sure your connector node knows you really well and would say great things about you. When you name drop someone, a lot of candidates are going to back channel you with them. In fact, this is precisely what you want because if they do, you're essentially turning a cold outbound into a warmish referral. As a courtesy, I would give your connector node a heads up they're going to be doing this so that they're not surprised if they start to see back channels come their way. As a side note, anyone who's not comfortable with you doing this and sourcing into their connections, they may not be a great connector node to source from in the first place because you're going to want them to say good things when those candidates back channel. So here's an example template that we use to hire actually our first female engineer at Gem, Enos. We name dropped the connector node first thing to establish credibility. We added 1 to 2 sentences of personalization. We introduced our startup, and then we ended with a call to action, which was to grab a coffee with me. And the really cool thing is Enos back-channeled with our friend Neha, who said, yeah, I know Steve, I know Nick, I know Drew from MIT. They're super legit. And she actually shared that with me in our very first coffee chat. So I know how powerful this is. Little side note, I later learned that this is a widely adopted strategy by actual hiring managers at LinkedIn, leveraging their own product. One of them used me as a connector node when they were next hiring for their own startup, and I can totally see why it was super effective. All right, so that covers the deep dives for the S tier and the A tier. For the rest of the sources and how to think about them and how to use them effectively, check out startuphiring101.com. Next up, we're going to move on to the initial sell meeting. So once you've started working your network, mining referrals, maybe doing some secondary sourcing, what are you going to do as those Zoom calls, coffees, lunches start coming in? Remember how I said that closing starts with that very first conversation? At Gem, we go as far as to call that first conversation with any candidate the initial sell meeting. In this first conversation, you need to get really great at making them comfortable, getting to know what's important to them, which is very similar to discovery and sales, telling your story, And then doing a little bit of qualification on whether they're a good fit, but only if you've done bullets 1 through 3. If somebody applies directly to your company, you can spend a little bit more time evaluating them up front, but I'd still say at least half of your time should be spent getting them excited and selling them on your vision. If somebody from your network agreed to meet you for a casual coffee or catch up or responded to your cold email, I think your most important goal in that first conversation is to sell them. Your only objective is to get them interested in taking a next step. So maybe even 70 or 80% of your time should be spent closing. 20% of your time can be evaluating them. And closing doesn't mean pitching. It doesn't mean just pitching your company straight out of the gate. You need to get to know them first. Once you've given them a chance to tell you what's important to them, then you can share a little bit about your company and tailor your pitch to what's important. So how do you get to know what candidates want? You need to understand their motivations. There's a couple of frameworks that experts look to for how humans make decisions. One that I personally like is the 5 Fs. It's specific to recruiting. It's from Who, written by Jeff Smart. Am I a good fit? Will I be able to balance my family? Will I have freedom and autonomy? What's in it for me financially? And then how much fun am I going to have? So most candidates are considering these 5 categories and sometimes more. I think the art and the personalization of recruiting is figuring out how the stack ranking works. Some people might be valuing freedom coming from a large company. Others might be valuing fortune if they had a few startups that didn't pan out. So a lot of this is getting at somebody's primary motivations, and getting to know your candidate's motivations is going to allow you to frame up your opportunity along the dimensions that actually matter to them, instead of just pitching cold without having any context. So how do you get to know what's important to someone? Well, in sales, we have this concept of discovery, and it's how we understand what's important to our buyer. Before we pitch, before we demo, we ask questions to get our prospects talking, to learn what's important. And if you know anything from sales, it's really helpful for framing your pitch, but also helps you qualify people out if what you have isn't a good fit for them. On the other hand, it can help guide your prospect to uncover a factor or a dimension that they didn't even realize was important to them that lines up with your opportunity. So here are some example questions I like to ask from that very first initial sell call to learn what's important. Just like in sales, you can have a set of questions that you generally like to ask going in, but you should tweak them to your situation. If you really master discovery, it should feel natural and conversational. But for most folks, especially for your passive talent, your passive L1 and L2 connections, it's going to be the long game. The timing might not be right. They may need to see more progress from your startup, or you might just need to get them excited over multiple conversations over a longer period of time. And here's where it's really important to follow up regularly, as frequently as every couple of weeks, if you get the sense that they're starting to lean in, or maybe every 3 to 6 months if they're more passive. When it comes to following up, I like a broad mix of touch points, including low, medium, and high touch. Here are a bunch of different ideas for how you can engage with talent if they're more passive. Regardless of the touch point, a few best practices. Before you have a touch point with somebody who's passive, review your notes from your spreadsheet or from Gem. Come prepared with a few ideas for next steps, depending on where the conversation might go. Continue to get to know them. Keep asking discovery questions. Be excited. Excitement is contagious. One of my favorite tricks is to demonstrate momentum over multiple conversations. I liked in the early days sharing a few high confidence things that we were working towards that would very likely happen in the next few weeks, whether that's revenue milestones or marquee customers that we're about to sign or new product launches, because then you can circle back on those things when they happen and create a sense of momentum and credibility as you accomplish those things that you said you were going to do. Keep getting a pulse on timing. Always suggest a next step. Consider just pulling up your calendar and scheduling that live while you're with them. And then after the touch point, jot down a few notes while it's fresh. Set a reminder for yourself. You're going to want a place to track all these people, store notes, set reminders. You could roll your own Google Sheet or Airtable if you're a small startup, or you could use Gem projects, which are kind of like spreadsheets designed specifically for recruiting. All right, so we're reaching out to people. We're following up with them. Some folks are starting to convert. It's time to start interviewing. We are super behind on time, so I'm going to blaze through this. Do the research, figure out what you need, whether that's hard skills, specific experience, or personality traits. You probably already have a sense of how to do this for things that you have experience. So if you're a CTO, you probably have a sense of how to evaluate engineers. But as founders, we're very likely going to be hiring for roles we've never hired before, roles we've never done before. So as a CTO, maybe we're hiring for a first PM or a designer. As a CEO, maybe we're hiring for a sales rep or a marketing hire when we haven't done those things. My favorite tip here when hiring for a new role that you haven't done is to get introduced to 5 ideal candidates just to pick their brain and get calibrated. These are passive people. They're not even looking. So you get calibrated on what good looks like. A lot of times your recruiting partner or a talent partner at one of your VCs can be really helpful for making those intros. Plus, a lot of times these folks might even convert into process. This is actually how we hired our VP of finance in the early days of Gem, who over 5 years has scaled to become my chief operating officer here at Gem and runs a bunch of different teams for us. On the right is what an example loops looks like. Check out startuphiring101.com for a lot of different example loops, including how to get creative if you're doing full remote, where you don't have to be as rigid as always having on-site interviews. Again, I'm going to blaze through these next 3 sections so that we have some time to focus on selling and closing and Q&A. Interviewer best practices. Check out the online guide at startuphiring101.com. I actually open sourced all of our interviewer best practices doc. Here, I'm just going to show you what that looks like. You can just copy and paste this doc into a Google Doc or a Notion or a paper doc, and then share it with your team. Same for debrief best practices and how to run a debrief. Share this with any hiring managers you have, your other founders who might be running debriefs. And then same for how to do reference checks. You can actually see example questions to ask here, even reach out templates for how to engage with people that could do references for you. And we can answer questions about any of this stuff at the end if folks want to go deeper on any of these areas live. All right, selling and closing. Usually when people think of closing, they think of this. Who here has seen this skit? If you haven't, it's called Coffee is for Closers. It's pretty funny. It's somewhat extreme, but I like it. I appreciate the finality. Yeah, I see some raised hands. People have seen this. If you don't close, you don't get coffee. If you don't close, you go back to the very top of the funnel and talk to the 50 to 100 candidates that it takes to get to one offer. I think the slogan, always be closing, it has a really nice ring to it. But another way I think about this as it relates to recruiting is start closing early. Closing begins with your initial reach out. It continues with your first coffee chat throughout the interview process, through the offer stage, and even beyond until your employee's first day. So don't wait to make an offer to start closing someone. It's not genuine. People don't like it. Here are some tactics for closing throughout the interview process. Run a tight process with a quick turnaround time. Speed is one of your biggest advantages as a startup over big companies. Always have a next step planned. Continue to do discovery throughout. I aim to learn at least one new thing in every single touch point. If you've really gotten to know your candidates' motivations, you can sell to them and it's going to feel genuine and like you're on their team. Give them a sense of what it feels like to be on your team. Invite them to things. We continue to do this for candidates even at this stage of Gem. At the bare minimum, we time their interviews so they can come on site for lunch with the team. But if they're joining us on a day when we have all hands, we might ask them to join. We've done this for stand-ups, interesting customer calls. One fun trick is to use preemptive language. If they notice something unique about your startup or your office or your culture, you can say, you'll see a lot more of this when you join. It gets your candidates starting to think and imagine themselves at your company. As you get closer to making an offer, mistakes get costlier and costlier. The biggest mistake that I see with founders closing, and even a lot of recruiters recruiting for the first time, is they make offers when they're ready to make the offer, as opposed to when a candidate is ready to receive one. In sales, this would be just like negotiating terms before your prospect has said that you're a vendor of choice. And why is this so bad? Well, just like in sales, as soon as you start to talk dollars, it completely changes the tone of the conversation. Suddenly, it becomes very hard to have an open conversation about the other dimensions that are important. So you want to talk and knock out those other dimensions first. One framework that I really like is the 1 to 10 method. Essentially, you ask, assuming we can iron out comp on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to accept an offer? The first few times I heard a lot of sixes and sevens in a very optimistic tone, and I moved straight to offer. Literally none of them accepted. So now when I hear a 6 or a 7, I know I have a lot of work to do. The key is to ask follow-up questions to dig in and see what would it take to get them to an 8 or a 9 or a 10. The 1 to 10 technique is really important because it's a catch-all for things that you missed in discovery or for things that have come up in the meantime. Yeah, Matt, no, I know this is a really cool trick that about 20% of people know to use in my experience. At the offer stage, anything less than a 9 or a 10 means you have a lot of work to do. A few more tactical things to prepare before you make the offer. One, are you aligned on role, the title? Do you know what your budget is in terms of cash and equity, your starting point, how much room you have to move? These are important things to know walking into the conversation instead of thinking about on the fly. Does the candidate have any competing offers? And then I like to have everything about the written offer prepared. Even if I need to end up tweaking one or two details after the conversation, I have a draft ready to send in my email so I can send it over immediately or just a few minutes after presenting the verbal offer if I'm getting really good vibes. Going back to running a tight process and moving fast. When it comes to the offer, I like to be as transparent as possible, especially when it comes to equity. I try to learn about how much do they understand about equity, about options, about dilution, about liquidity, about 409A versus preferred price. If they don't have a great understanding, you can educate your candidate about it, which builds trust. And then if they're savvy about it, a lack of transparency might feel shady. At Gem, we went as far as to explain how we arrived at the offer, how we pulled the data in PAVE. Carta also has a really cool equity calculator that you could share with folks. But I like to take a really transparent approach to all of hiring and all of closing because startups are super risky. If you're asking somebody to put a lot of trust in you by joining your small startup, the least you can do is show transparency. So if you're not willing to share, here are the biggest challenges, here are the milestones we need to hit to get to our next round, here's our runway. If you're dodgy about your revenue, you're going to lose credibility big time. And the smart people you want to work with, they're going to see right through it. After the offer, I like to ask this one simple question. We're all super excited to work with you. Is there anything else we can do to get you on board? And sometimes you get a really simple answer. Maybe it's bumping their base salary by 5K to match another offer. Or maybe it's this other company is willing to pay for this online course that they want to take. Oh yeah, of course you could do that. And there might be something super simple that the candidate wants and it's really important that you can do for them. And if you don't ask, you're never going to know. Once you've made that offer, it's all hands on deck, involve your team. One of my favorite tips here is to offer up chats with your investors. We did this for 95% of candidates in the early days until we were 20 or 30 people. We still do it for senior candidates, for leadership, and folks that have questions about things like the market and things where an outside investor perspective would be uniquely helpful. Outside investors and advisors, they give you outside validation. So I'm really surprised at how few companies leverage their investors in this way. And good investors are going to be excited about this because this is one of the highest leverage things they can do to help you is help you close your early team. Get creative though. We've had customers hop on calls with a lot of our hires, especially leadership hires, especially customer facing roles. And hearing about their enthusiasm for your product, your team, it's going to make everything feel so much more tangible. Even if candidates can't chat one-on-one with everybody on your entire team, have your team send them a congrats email, especially in the early days. Dinners are another really great way for everybody on your team to have a touch point, signed cards. At Gem, we have this really cool tradition where we record a video montage from a bunch of members of your team. Tribute makes this really easy to do. But we've gotten super creative at this stage. For example, we learned early on that one of our candidates really liked to travel hack, where you use points to fly first class around the world. And we found out that there was a certain airline he'd been wanting to fly for a long time, but he couldn't use his points. So we booked him a refundable first class ticket to Paris, and we gave it to him along with his offer letter. He was blown away by the personal touch. And guess what? When he signed, he told all of his smart engineering friends about this baller trip that he got to take as signing with Gem. And then we had 3 more travel hackers join us, friends of him that heard about this. It sounds extravagant, but it was actually a lot cheaper than a 10K signing bonus. So, we learned about favorite restaurants. We even found out about this candidate that wanted to do a weekend long artisanal meat cutting retreat and got him tickets to that. All right, a few more common things that might come up in the close that are super important to know about. It's competition, it's counteroffers, and it's exploding deadlines. We don't have time to dive deep into them today, so check out Startup Hiring 101.com for playbooks and example talk tracks and talking points for how to handle each of these. After somebody signs, closing does not stop. I've seen so many examples of people reneging, falling out of process from my time at Dropbox, so I'm never 100% confident until they start on day one. Here are a bunch of ideas to keep the momentum going after somebody signs. And then I'm just going to close with a few closing thoughts. Get it? And then we're going to jump into Q&A. So first, when it comes to finding candidates, start with your network first, then work referrals, then try the connector node trick and second degree sourcing. Leverage agencies if you don't necessarily have a network or if you're not an expert in a role, they can be really helpful. Recruiting is just like sales, always be closing. Third, the close starts with your initial conversation. It continues all the way through the process, even after they've signed. 4, closing doesn't mean only pitching. It means asking the right questions and doing discovery to understand candidates' motivations and then to tailor your opportunity to their needs. 5, make an offer not only when you're ready, but when your candidate is ready too. The 1 to 10 trick can really help. And then finally, I've been in your shoes. Those early startup hires are going to be the hardest. You're going to have to hustle. It's going to be a lot of work. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, but the opportunity is huge. If you can master recruiting, if you can hire an exceptional founding team, not only is it going to propel your startup forward, but it's going to make each incremental hire easier and easier because great people want to work with other great people. Plus, building your team becomes one of the most rewarding parts of the journey when it comes to startups. So 2 resources I'm going to leave you with. Again, startuphiring101.com, the open source guide based on how we hired our founding team at Gem. And then gem.com/startups with really exciting startup plan and program with heavy discounts and low pricing for any company of up to 100 employees. With that, we're going to open it up for questions. I know we got started like 5 minutes late, so I'm happy to hang out a little bit extra if people have more questions. Drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to them. I'm going to stop sharing and jump into Q&A. Looks like we had a question here. Will the presentation and deck be sent after the webinar today? Yes, we will send that out. We're going to send a recording of the presentation to everyone here. So you can go back and review this, or you can miss parts of the talk or catch parts of the talk that you might have missed. What other questions do folks have? Let's see here. I think somebody had a question about campus recruiting. Why is campus recruiting a harder strategy for startups? Well, for larger companies, campus recruiting becomes a really effective approach. And that's because you can invest the time that it takes to crack a new campus. In my experience from recruiting at Dropbox, it would take us 2 to 3 years to unlock a new campus because you have to first, like your first year at a campus, you have to network into a lot of the people there, figure out who's really good, hire a few people, which gives you a lot of credibility for the next year and then the year after that. And once you start to hire great people, it starts to snowball and you start to create a really great reputation, especially if you're hiring interns too. They go back to school, they share their positive experience, but it takes a long time to unlock a new campus. And startups don't have as much time and resources. And so unlocking a net new campus that you didn't go to, or even a campus where you graduated a long time ago, isn't going to work for small startups. in the same way that it works for larger companies. The one exception with campus recruiting is if you have a really strong network there, and then it basically becomes like in-network hiring, and it can be really effective to go on site to campuses and do a bunch of coffee chats and get people that you already know excited about your opportunity. Lindsay's asking, when is the right time to bring on a full-time recruiter or a fractional talent partner? Great question. I have two answers to that. So it's less about company size. It's less about funding amount. It's more about how much are you going to hire as a startup ongoing from now on. And so once you get to the point where as a startup, you're regularly hiring 5 to 10 people a quarter, I think that's a great time to bring on a full-time recruiter. If you know you're going to scale up in that way for the foreseeable future. So it's usually after you get to product market fit. You don't want to bring on a full-time recruiter if you're only going to grow to 10 people and you might not know when you're going to need to hire next. So, hopefully that intuitively makes sense. But you could work with a fractional talent partner as early as just a handful of people. I think you're still going to want to be spending a lot of time working your network as a founder, especially for those engineering hires. But I find fractional partners to be really great for giving you a boost, especially if they have some experience in places where you don't have a strong network. What else? Drop your questions in the chat, or you can just drop them in the Q&A here. We've got about 5 or 6 more minutes. Can go a little bit over here on my end. Just going to check my calendar real quick. Yeah, I've got like 5, 6 more minutes. Let's see. I think I got a question in the Q&A about back channel references. So back channel references, these are pretty controversial. A lot of people take issue with back channel references, especially candidates. It doesn't feel great for them to have you going around their back and referencing with people that they don't know about. And it gets especially dicey if you're trying to reference into a company where they currently work. You don't want to blow their cover that they're looking for jobs. That's super important. But my somewhat strong opinion about this is forget that they're controversial. As a startup, you've got to be doing back channel references. First of all, hiring mistakes as a small startup are super costly. When you're like just 5 people, for example, one person is 20% of your company. Even if you're 20 people, that's like 5% of your company is a single person. Plus, when you hire the wrong person, it can be really toxic and catastrophic. Unlike a big company that can take in hires, performance manage them out over a long period of time. As startups, when you're like 5, 10, 20, 30 people, everybody knows this person. And so hiring the wrong person can be really costly. And so that's why I think back channel references are pretty important for small startups especially. But also a lot of your hiring is going to be in network. And so you can uniquely get back channel references because chances are if they're in your network, a lot of other people from your network are going to know them too and will have personally worked with them even if you haven't directly worked with them on a project in the past. Let's see. Any other questions here? Yeah, if you have to jump, totally understand. We're over the hour here. Thanks for joining us, Alvaro. What else? Probably field one more question if folks have it. And by the way, this could be for larger companies too. I have a lot of experience with that, even though this talk was mostly focused on startup hiring. I know we have folks dialing in with a diversity of experience and people hiring for different sizes of companies. Just checking the Q&A here. All right. Good stuff. We're coming up on 12:05 Pacific, and so now is probably a great time to wrap. Thanks for joining me, everybody. Again, 2 resources I wanted to leave everybody with. The first is startuphiring101.com. That's the set of like 20 guides that I've open sourced based on how we hired our founding team at Gem. Includes a ton of like really practical best practices, templates, playbooks that I've open sourced from all of our early hiring. And so whether you're a startup founder, feel free to bookmark that. Or if you're a recruiting partner that's doing fractional or full-time work with hiring, feel free to share that with the founders that you're collaborating with. You don't need to be using Gem. It's completely Gem agnostic. But then if you do want to check out Gem, check out gem.com/startups for our startup program. Again, Gem is free for 6 months for startups that are fewer than 30 employees. And then we offer 50% off already really low all-in-one pricing for companies of up to 100 employees. So it's a really great deal, probably the highest value, lowest cost startup program in the recruiting space, period. It's the highest reviewed deal on the YC internal forum in the recruiting category. So definitely check it out if you're building out your founding team or even scaling up to 100 employees and beyond. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, folks.